So today we've got a fantastic session where we are going to be discussing cybersecurity issues, and we've got a very good and insightful CISO roundtable, which is going to be chaired by Peter Wright of Digital Law UK. So this roundtable is going to explore the high priority risk factors, including cultural shifts associated with cybersecurity and data protection, and much more. Now, this session is going to last about an hour. We're also going to be undertaking a live poll around the discussion today, as well as a live Q&A. So if you would like to join in with the question and have a question you'd like to ask any of the panelists, so please do put up your hand, which you'll see at the bottom. It will be ask a question, Q&A, or through the chat. What I will be doing is moderating that with Peter, where we will then bring you in, draw you in live and to ask your questions to either Dee, Ian, or Jenny, or Peter himself, and then we'll be able to bring you in that way, or through the Q&A, or through the chat. So Peter, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you. So welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, Francis, and hello everyone around the world joining us today for this event. It's great to be able to use our technology to have a virtual discussion of the pressing issues to us all when it comes to having both gone through the lockdown and now as we start to come out of it. And what's great with today's event is to have such a broad range of expertise on our panel with people from firms of various different sizes which are dealing with so many different challenges. Before I get our panelists to introduce themselves, I'd just like to direct you to the poll that should be available for you. There's a poll with some questions on there, multiple choice answers with a few questions, and it would be really great to help us with our discussion today if you could take a look at those poll questions and let us know what you, for example, have been your major challenges when it comes to dealing with the lockdown, and indeed challenges as we emerge, risks as we emerge from the lockdown. So if you could take a look at those options and let us know what your views on there, that would be absolutely fantastic, because it will help us when we come to our discussion. If you could please click on your answers there within the next 2 minutes, that will mean we've then got plenty of information on there for us for our discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to just hand over now to each of our panelists just so that they can very quickly introduce themselves while you're answering your poll questions. So first of all, Jenny.
Hi, my name's Jenny Chuck. I'm the Information Security and Compliance Manager at Fieldfisher, based in London. Over to you, Ian.
Thanks, Jenny. Ian Dalby, I'm part of the global security team at Dentons. So Dentons is a global law firm, so we have firms across the board from Europe, Africa, Asia, and a whole bunch of other places I've not quite visited yet.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. And Dee.
Hi, my name is Dee Pang. I am the CISO of Solicitor and May. I've been there for just over 2 years, and prior to that, I ran the cybersecurity function for Freshfields Brookhouse Derringer.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. So while everyone's just finishing off doing their polling now, what I'd like to do is just ask you guys, first of all, the same question that we've asked our panelists there. So what's been your single biggest challenge during the lockdown period that we're now emerging from for you and your respective organisations? Jenny, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I think it's difficult to choose a single challenge, because I think for all of us, it was the very swift migration from people who were very used to working in an office to moving outside of their offices and into their homes, getting all of that technology up and running, and actually helping people through that, through the front office service desk teams, and making sure that they were able to connect into the systems adequately and properly. So I think that was the first initial challenge.
And of course, it was doing that at such speed as well in
Absolutely.
many instances.
It was a real test of previous tests that we'd actually conducted, making sure that you have the load available for everybody to work in that way, the technology available, and of course equipment at their home when they're sharing it with multiple people within their homes, making sure that they can connect in.
Ian, what was the biggest challenge for you?
Yeah, well, I think there was a bunch of specifics. I mean, Jenny mentioned some of the technical issues and logistic issues, and certainly I think I would endorse those, but probably because of the scale of the change and the speed of that change, I think the biggest concern for us was really that maintaining the awareness of the risks. So, you're trying to tell people about the risks from working from home, the risks from adopting new technology, but actually people are just really struggling to keep their day jobs going. So often to get enough time to engage people to explain the implications of those risks, because there are certainly two factors I think everybody has seen in this period. One is there's been a huge increase in the volume of cyber attacks. So across any dimension, any report that has gone significantly higher than most periods we've seen, and there's been a huge spike related to COVID-specific attacks. And then as well as that, you've got the increased attack surface. So working from home gives cyber criminals much more scope and much more opportunity to do what they are trying to do. So I think we've tried to bundle our efforts into highlighting the risks alongside using some of those new methods, tools and ways of working. So I think we kind of see those two things happening across our estate.
And Ian, you mentioned there the sort of the volume of the increased volume of cyber threats that are out there, and particularly those that were COVID related. The NCSC was saying even back in stats from March, let alone in April, when of course more countries were under lockdown conditions, they were saying they were reporting about a 400% increase in COVID-relating phishing traffic in March alone. Was that your experience, or given the many jurisdictions that you're operating in, was it even higher?
I think it's probably similar. There's been a couple of other variations according to the maturity of those markets. I mean, we've certainly seen different spikes at different times depending upon the scale of that of the lockdown. But I think we've seen not only an increased scale of attack, we've also seen more targeted and more sophistication of those attacks. So I think people have used COVID as a reason, but actually they've done that in a much more sophisticated way than we've seen previously. These weren't very generic phishing attacks or other attacks. These were very, very targeted, often using kind of OSINT type information to target some very, very specific individuals in our firm. So we've seen a combination of those.
Yeah, so the real targeted spear phishing sort of thing.
Yes.
Dee, what's been the biggest challenge for you and your firm during this period?
I think I'd struggle to name a single biggest challenge. I think rather it's the case that we've had to deal with a series of challenges that have emerged throughout the lockdown. A good example is starters, movers, leavers processes. And that's not something that probably figures prominently in most people's business continuity arrangements. And yet, because of the extended duration of the lockdown, we've had to put in processes to make sure that we can securely get kit out to new starters and that we can retrieve kit. I think building on what Ian has spoken about phishing, that's been a big concern for us as well. So we started a concerted awareness campaign around greater phishing risks, and it's not just email phishing; it's SMS phishing, it's voice phishing. So we one of the things that we asked people to do was, for instance, to be aware that you don't have something on your telephone telling you who is calling you as if you were in the office. So that there are additional safeguards that or processes you might have to implement to actually verify who you're speaking with, because you're not going to know the voice of everybody at your firm. Lots of little things, really. Broadband is a good example. Things that don't emerge immediately, but actually over time, if you're working at home permanently, if you're on broadband where you've got an allocated number of gig per month, you're going to run out pretty quickly if you're running 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. Other issues have been around confidentiality. Trainee lawyers who might be in tiny flats, sharing a flat with 4 other people who might also be trainees of other law firms. It's working out guidance that we can, sensible guidance and practical guidance that we can give people that are working under the circumstances. So lots of little things, but I'd struggle to name a single big challenge.
I mean, you mentioned there about that sort of awareness piece. How did you go about doing that? Was it, because I know some organisations have struggled with ordinarily you'd have your team together in a room, you can update them in the morning, right, we need to think about this, we need to be aware of that, and then suddenly we're all dispersed. Did that present any particular challenges?
No, but we've got, I mean, we're Teams users, so, you know, everybody, so there's an awful lot of video conferencing going on. So speaking for myself, I'd probably spend first half of every day permanently in video conference meetings. And the very first one is one with my own team. So at the top of the day, every day, we do a meeting. It might only be 15 minutes, it might be half an hour, just to catch up on what everybody's doing and what everybody's got lined up for the day. So I think the firm has had to adapt its practices. Video conferencing was probably previously something that was reserved for, you know, something that you did with clients or suppliers or third parties. We didn't previously have such large numbers of people working at home, so it has been quite a big change for us. But I think it's one that, because the technology has been in place, I think people have adapted quite quickly out of need, I suppose.
Sorry, I was just going to add in there as well, Peter. I think everybody's talked about passing that information out. I think the communications that were going on right at the beginning of this arrangement, there was vast pieces of information going out to the user base. So trying to help them process that and get that in a format that's easy to digest really becomes pretty crucial. That's what we found quite early on. Bite-sized, short, easy to understand, and know where to go if you've got questions about anything. That's really important.
It's also not overdoing it on the communications either, because you know, the volume of email traffic, I think everybody has probably noticed that it has probably gone up significantly because, you know, you don't have those in-person meetings anymore. So it's managing your communications while at the same time every other department is trying to get their own messages out as well. So that's been a challenge too.
And when it comes to that sort of training and awareness piece, and making sure people are aware of this, I mean, Jenny, I know at your firm it was slightly less of a hurdle for you insofar as you did a lot of your sort of cyber awareness and training. That was all online anyway. But even though you've got the system there online, it still presents a certain list of challenges as well. So you then rely on that more.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we always kind of operate this hybrid of communications. So, you know, we like to stand in front of people and talk about things that are specific to that group. We like email communications. We like to do the online training. I think for us early on and for the firm, it became important that that training was delivered quickly. I think, you know, we also have to bear in mind that there are competing priorities as well, where people are trying to settle into this new way of working. And of course, trying to service their clients and support their families who are in the same house for long periods of time with them at the same time. So it's trying to make sure that everything fits and there's something available to everybody at whatever time they need to take that information in.
And it's interesting, we've just got the poll being shared there with the responses from everyone. The biggest single issue has been that one of remote working, and of course then the ancillary challenges that also brings. And Ian, I'm thinking, but particularly there was a fantastic point that Dee made with regards to the infrastructure, the broadband that we rely on. What if you've only got 8 gig? What if 6.5 of that gig was used by another family member playing Fortnite for 3 days running? And then, great, we've lost it. So I can imagine that must have been a real challenge for your firm. And in particular, of course, Dentons, many of your countries were starting to struggle with dealing with lockdown conditions before those of us with offices in the West were starting to come across those issues. So you're very much reinventing the wheel as it went.
Well, I think we've seen it on both a personal scale. You know, the piece that Dee was talking about, individual users have definitely had challenges. We've also had significant challenges across some of our network sectors as well. So when everybody suddenly jumps on their Zoom call at 9 o'clock in the morning, then we've had to do some work in terms of load balancing our networks. And I think the other part is if you're operating in less mature environments. So some of our African regions, their telcos are not really used to these types of extensions and expansions in a rapid way. So we've been quite creative in how we've actually deployed some of that technology. I think we've also had to be more realistic in terms of some of the systems that we've deployed in that period as well. So even though we're a global company, I don't think we take a one-size-fits-all approach. So we've done things that work for certain regions. So the UK and the US and Canada, these are very mature sectors. We know we can support that, but I think there's been much more basic challenges, let's say, in other regions, and trying to stop people sticking everything onto a USB drive and putting it in the post is always a great challenge.
Which is funny how sort of older technologies have indeed suddenly it's become in some ways more reliable for a client who might have thought, right, I need to share this information. The best way of me doing this is via the USB, which leaves you with almost with your head in your hands, I can imagine at that point.
Well, the other thing that we've done, I think it touches on it, one of the preparation questions. Obviously, with the increased scale of some of the cyber attack activities, we've also done a focus on some of our incident response preparedness, and some of that includes increasing our monitoring capabilities. So when we're looking at monitoring, we're also looking at cloud-based access and CASB type reports where we can see who's using what type of cloud systems, and we've also seen a lot of people in certain regions deciding to back up their own data to G drives or to other, let's say, less secure cloud environments. So we've also used some of that monitoring capability to try and capture and stop some of that alongside our other DLP tools. So we've also tried to use that, and comes back to kind of Jenny's point in terms of targeted awareness rather than blanket statements. We're trying to choose both the high risk groups, whether that's the secretaries of the senior partners or the people that are doing uploading 40-50 gig to a G drive. So we've tended to try and target some of those high risk activities more.
I think as well, it's become increasingly important to have those touch points into those key groups within the organisation. So people who are at the ground level know what's happening within their department and actually feel sufficiently free to tell you what's really going on. So making sure we're ahead of the game and able to respond to those needs and requirements rather than finding out about them further down the line because of a problem.
And it's interesting, just going back to that sort of that awareness piece as well, Jenny, our third question there on the poll, how have you handled cyber risk management and training? And 80% have said it's via the online training. So certainly you were well placed there insofar as you're already relying on online training, but then it's a matter of then utilising it to such a broad extent and a greater extent than might have originally been envisaged.
I think it's really difficult as well because there is this need to remind everybody of the basics, but as this continues, and we've already heard that potentially there are some potential second waves starting to come, so people are going in and then they're coming back out again, how we can keep on top of keeping those messages really clear, really consistent for people, so that there is no room for error or misinformation to start circulating. That becomes really important as well.
I mean, just to add to that point as well, Peter, I think that not only have we got that direct broadcast awareness communication, which I think we're all probably using, we've also done other types of awareness activities for our own team. So whether that's phishing tests internally or that type of monitoring. And so because Jenny's much nicer than me, I'll give my example that we've deliberately used things like simulated Microsoft Teams logons and document request emails that look very, very similar to the normal Microsoft one. So we deliberately used those in the middle of that initial wave to see if we could see what the level of failure would look like. And the results were quite surprising because it was very consistent with our previous testing. So I think maybe the heightened awareness has probably helped. So maybe if we did that same test as people start to come out of lockdown, I think we may see some degradation of those results because it's not as in front of people and they're not so heightened in terms of their awareness. So so we've done a combination of things to track how we're doing in these periods.
And it's interesting as well on our question 3 there that 1 in 3 firms have been carrying out phishing exercises as well. So indeed, as well as the avalanche of targeted phishing and spear phishing that's taking place, then also it's a matter of being careful for the stuff that in-house teams are trying to put out there as well.
I think it's really interesting because right when all this started, one of the things we did tell our staff was that we had no intention of carrying out any phishing assessments. The reason we took that view was because what we wanted to see is people making sure that they reported anything which came in. We did have a view that we had so much coming in at the time that actually it was more important that they started reporting to us. So we've seen a massive uptake in reports into us over the last 9 weeks.
But that was a good double bluff, Jenny. I like that.
It really was.
I think that's an important point, and just making sure that your partners and staff do have that engagement with your IT service desk, that if there's any doubt about anything that they should call in, and I think we've taken a lot of trouble to make sure that point has been reinforced. So we don't want people implementing workarounds. If there's any doubt, then we want them to contact us, and we'll find a practical solution. That's the commitment that we make.
I think it was really interesting when this all started, because at the same time we had this, massive shift towards house party app, Zoom app. There was massive communications in, can we, can't we, should we, shouldn't we? So responding to this, and almost it's a, you find yourself in a position where you don't want to be telling everybody what they shouldn't be using. It's reminding them that we have all of these tools available, and they are fantastic tools if they're used in the right way. So sending out all those reminders as well, not just on what you shouldn't be doing, but what you should.
No, absolutely, because there's so many tools out there that I think we've got 3 tools that are approved for the firm's use, and every other tool, we can use the browser to participate in them, but in other people's computers, but we can't install the software. So it's just getting that message out. So, there was a lot of pushback from the business initially, but we stuck to our guns. No, these are the 3 that have been security tested. We're not installing anything else. And we haven't had to deviate from that, luckily.
And I was going to say, I'm sure everybody else on this panel has received, a significant increase from client inquiries about what we are doing during this time as well. So even more important to reinforce those points so our clients are comfortable that we are continuing business as usual, and we're not opening them up to further potential issues. Because people have found that shadow IT so useful.
And I think it comes down to that, the old classic issue as well of sometimes needing to be able to push back on the client who's saying, I really want to communicate using this system. I really want you to call me or send me information on WhatsApp or Facebook because that's what suits me because of where I'm working, or I know that work, and having to sort of gently sometimes push back and say, actually, no, that's not really suitable for us to send you highly confidential, privileged material. But sometimes it's a very difficult touch point in the in terms of where you're wanting to direct that with the client. But sometimes it's just a conversation that has to be had. I just wanted to sort of oh, and it's interesting. One of our people on our attendees has said they've had a scam phone call during the course of this webinar. So the threats are always out there. But I just wanted to also mention about the fact that now, for many countries, we're now coming out of lockdown. So we're looking at the relaxation of the measures. We're looking at trying to get workforces back in the office, but observing social distancing will open up challenges in terms of who's going to be in the office, who isn't, what systems are still going to be handled remotely, and a whole host of new challenges, not to mention things like making sure that people are perhaps getting regular tests or thermal image scans or actual COVID testing in the office. All of these different challenges we're having to wrestle with. So I just wanted to ask you as our panel what you'd found the biggest risk was for you and your firms as you emerged from the lockdown. Interestingly, on our poll, they've said security and continuity is the biggest issue for 44% of our delegates today.
I think for me, one of the obvious ones that people are going to have to exercise a level of discipline around social distancing that they're not going to be used to in the workplace. Although they've had to do social distancing for a long time, there is the concern that could all go out the window once people are back in the office and they think everything's back to normal. So I think there is going to be a period of adjustment, because you don't want that lack of discipline to result in further infection. So that's something we're going to have to be very careful about. And I can't see firms allowing the entirety of their staff back in one fell swoop either. I think it's going to be quite measured. I think we're going to have probably quite a prolonged period where you've got some people that need to work in the office, but and those numbers will probably ramp up over time. But I think it is going to probably be quite gradual. And one of the things that could be a consequence of that is that you lose that cohesion that you've actually currently got within your teams at the moment, because everybody is in the same boat. Everybody is currently working from home. So once you get into a dynamic where you've got a core group of people that are back in the office working relatively normally, that you lose some of that cohesion. So that is something that I think that I'm certainly going to be considering in my own team.
Ian, when it comes to Dentons and the fact, of course, you've got some offices in some countries where now countries are starting to open back up more fully, and I suppose you've already had to go through some of these challenges. What's been the biggest risk that you've found?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe it's the most frequent question we're asked rather than the most significant risk, but I think it's certainly an area that we've not touched on, and that's really around some of the data privacy issues that return to work highlights. So I think you mentioned thermal scans. So a number of our firms are looking at those types of tests, and obviously the implications of what we do with that data. So if you're fortunate enough to have missed GDPR, then there's a whole heap of fun in store for you. But for people whose role spans both data privacy and security, which I think most of ours does anyway, even if we don't necessarily want it to, how we handle some of this data either as a one-off, but also we're seeing a lot of questions from our clients around how they should be handling that type of data as well. So as usual, I think there's not been a huge amount of guidance from regulatory authorities. And so in some ways, I think we're trying to see what works across various jurisdictions, and actually some jurisdictions are much more strict, have much more constraints than others. And I think we're also starting to see some broader inquiries around the use of those track and tracing apps generally. I won't mention the NHS one because I don't think they've had a particularly good day today. But I think as those start to get further adoption, we're going to get a lot of questions around the use of that data, how that's secured, what we're going to do with that, and all the legal tests that go along with that.
Yeah, and I mean, I was going to just add in a few other additional details there around the fact that you've already got people who are in kind of these extreme fatigue situations about returning to work. They've been managing, not just the work situation, but their family situation, their friends. There's a lot of isolation around teams that do work very naturally in the office together are no longer doing so. So I think there's a lot of change coming around how teams are going to continue to function in that sort of disparate arrangement. And just to touch on some of the other points, I think from our perspective, it's about making sure that those risk assessments are carried out really early on. So the right people are having the discussions with the teams who are making the decisions about where that information is going to go, who's going to be looking at it, and how widely we're going to be circulating it. So for me, it's all about risk assessment and making sure that we know what we're doing with that data, if indeed we are offering those services to people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that you consult the right people, and in our firm, that's going to be our privacy lawyers. So we're going to work with them to make sure that only as much data that's actually needed is actually recorded. And one of the most important things is to actually retain records of why you made a particular decision. So that's privacy impact assessments, it's legitimate interest assessments. So if you are challenged on why you took a particular decision, you've got the evidence to hand.
Sorry, I was just going to add as well, we're already starting to see, we have quite a big tech practice, and we're already starting to hear from clients who are looking at technologies to support and indeed enhance protection while people are working remotely. So the idea is not so far-fetched that there might be technology out there to watch if somebody else is coming into the room that you're supposed to be working in. Is it really secure? So yeah, it's going to be quite an interesting time moving forward.
Indeed it is. Indeed, that point on sort of demonstrating compliance, I think, is crucial, because if the worst does happen, and we never want the worst to happen, but it's always a matter of hope for the best, plan for the worst. You want to have that sort of evidence trail available. You want to have documentation say, yeah, we did look at the risk, we've done all we could have reasonably done, given our size, given our resources, we've looked at the risk and we took appropriate measures. But I think one of the challenges of the last 2 months has been sometimes because we've been working at speed, we've not necessarily been able to carry out checks at the level of detail and take the level of time over all of that we might otherwise have normally done. And I can see everyone's nodding there. So has that been a sort of very much a challenge for all three of you? Ian?
Yeah, I mean, so we like to do the really mean thing and learn from the mistakes of other people. So we've been doing quite a lot of threat intelligence work across different sectors, and I think certainly in the UK and the US there have been a couple of fairly large-scale examples in the last couple of weeks and months around different law firms having some significant exposure and data breaches. And when you look at those, those weren't anything that we hadn't seen before. Ransomware, not patching properly, misconfiguration of web services. Nothing that shouldn't be a major issue for us, but I think it's just as part of the challenge of managing in this period with all the other factors going on. We have to make sure we're doing the basics really well. So we've actually increased our threat intelligence activities just to actually see what's happening and where some of those attacks are being targeted, the types of attacks, and then if it is a specific type of ransomware, because these tend to go in campaigns, we're then doing the checks back into our firms to make sure that we've got the controls in place, and those are valid and have been checked to make sure they're effective and resilient enough to withstand any of those attacks that are in the wild.
I was just going to add into that as well. I think it becomes increasingly important, certainly where you've got massive dependencies a lot of us have on third parties, really re-engaging with them, making sure that you're getting the best out of the technology that you have available, making sure that those controls are tight and operating exactly as you've just said there, efficiently and properly. So yeah, for us it's about working closely with those vendors in that space, and where we don't have those skills in-house, making sure that we're engaging with particular skill sets to get the best advice on some of those spaces.
And just to add, the other thing that we're doing as well that relates to that, we're also aware that maybe not for our big tech providers. So I don't think anybody's expecting Microsoft or Zoom to go out of business anytime soon, although that might be disappointing for some. But some of our smaller suppliers, those people that aren't a global entity that maybe service a very small sector or a small group, they may have cash flow issues as a result of COVID. So we're also doing a lot of financial viability tests on some of our smaller suppliers, because Jenny's right, that supply chain, our dependency on that supply chain is significant these days. There's very few companies that do all of that in-house. So we're not only doing the security assessments, we're also looking at if any of those companies need to be supported, or we need to look for alternatives.
Just to say to our audience, if you've got any questions, please do submit them, because we will be coming to those questions in the last 15 to 20 minutes or so. So please do submit your questions if you get a key burning issue during our discussion that you think you'd like to have covered. And I just want to continue, Ian, you raised there that interesting point with regards to sort of some of the challenges that come up and how when it comes to the sort of business management of certain things. And I just wanted to ask our panel as a whole, sort of bring us down to the fourth of our questions in the poll there, which is how have you had to sort of modify the way that business is undertaken in any sort of ways, any sort of organisational changes you had to have within the organisation, in terms of being able to react to the fact that, right, we're working from home now rather than being in the office? Are the things you've had to introduce, different ways of working, be it video conferencing, regular calls, fixed in the day, those sorts of things? I was just interested to sort of be able to, from the three of you, just to get your insights there in terms of how you may have had to change those.
Okay, yeah, we're certainly using video conferencing a lot more, and that's something that I think pretty much every team is doing, and it's become fairly routine. I think we've also had to put in a committee to keep an eye on the long game, on how we get things back to normal as well. So that is there are various forums and working groups associated with the pandemic specifically, what we're doing to make sure that we continue to do the right things, but also what we're going to do to get things back to normal. So, and strategizing and the rest of it. But I think fundamentally we've because of most of the IT infrastructure was already established, we're lucky in that we haven't had to do very much with regard to that. So most of it has actually been adapting business practices, adapting to meeting with clients over Teams, over Zoom in some cases, and other online meetings platforms. It has been to do with signing contracts, so not everybody will have been using digital signatures, for instance. So it's getting things like that so that they become the norm. Whereas they were in use before, but not as much as they are now, obviously. So that there have been lots of little things that we've had to do, and luckily they haven't all landed on us at the same time. So they are things that we've been able to deal with one at a time. So we haven't been bombarded with too much in the way of things that we're struggling to deal with.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, obviously, it goes without saying that the nature of team meetings and everything is quite different now. When you sitting in a room together, it's different when you're sitting at different locations. I think we've seen a really encouraging approach from our HR teams and our team leaders. There's much more reaching out to individuals and having conversations about how people are feeling, which is becoming increasingly important. I think we're seeing, actually, I don't know if we're the only firm doing this, but they have actually instigated a radio station. So, the team, the firm get together collectively and listen to an hour of music. That's probably happening right now. So that's had massive uptake and engagement. I think it's been an opportunity for bringing people together a bit as well. Much more talk about how people are doing and not just about work. And there's been some really creative ways that teams in our firm have done that.
A friend of mine I know has ended up walking around London each day with This Town's Coming Up, a Ghost Town, playing in their headphones on continuous loop just for the atmosphere of it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's coming to something, that one of the big things is, what track are we going to pick to represent the team? And, working in risk and information security is, trying to find the irony in a track.
I'm sure people get very creative. Ian, I know that it was quite a challenge for your firm with regards to things that ordinarily you would have handled. For example, rolling out patches would have been handled in a very different way to how you've suddenly had to start doing this in a virtual world, and that presented quite a challenge initially. Yeah,
I think most people have probably gone through that, and it comes back to the point Dee was talking about in terms of that cohesivity of your team when you've got some on site, some not on site, some in different time zones. But I think for us, and probably for most of us in terms of business services and IT teams, we're probably used to working virtually. Virtually is probably the norm for us. I think the big shift has really been our client-facing activities. So this has been a huge change for most law firms. Although when I do talk to the senior partners and the practice teams who do work directly with the clients, they've seen this as a real positive. And to kind of quote one of them, when you see your client in their pajamas, it increases your quality of dialogue. So it's been a very interesting experience, I think, for client engagement. I'm not sure how that works with new clients and pajamas, but that's a different story. And the most exciting thing is I think we're waiting for the results of the most inappropriate Zoom virtual background that we're still expecting to see that in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I wish I could say that this was a virtual Zoom background, but this is indeed my spare room, which is my office while I'm working from home. But there you go. It's not like it does look like a train waiting room, I know, but that's just the way. So, I mean, just going from there, we've talked a few times, and in particular, Jenny, there the issue with regards to vulnerable people that might be vulnerable, people that have been working under pressure. And of course, that does indeed create its own unique set of challenges insofar as you've then got people who are potentially a lot more susceptible to making mistakes when they're under pressure, when they're working at speed, working in ways that they may not have been used to. And I was just wondering, clearly that's something you've come across quite a bit.
I think that's fair. I mean, certainly when this initially started, we as a team had concerns about that. When people are under pressure, it's it's much easier to make those mistakes. And I think what we found was that it's really important to kind of help and support. You know, security is all about people at the end of the day. Yes, controls are absolutely crucial, but they're just one piece of the puzzle. And I think recognizing that it's not through people being anything other than distracted, you know, you have to support them through that. And I think what we will be looking at going forward is, you know, what additional buffers or protections can we put in to help people avoid those situations further. I think, you know, for us, the continued critical bit of information is people coming to us and talking to us when something does go wrong, and making sure that we can deal with it quickly. It's less about recrimination and more about, you know, supporting them through that situation.
I've certainly noticed a sort of increase and proliferation in people emailing at 2 or 3 in the morning. And it's because they've ended up having to, clearly they've been caring for people in their family, other family members who could be ill, vulnerable, or indeed dealing with childcare and having to be the virtual school teacher, the in-person school teacher in the absence of the school, and then pick up their day job responsibilities outside of that. So it's pushing people in ways I think that could never have been envisaged just a couple of months ago. Ian D, have you had similar issues, and has that sort of opened up risk in terms of your firms as well?
Absolutely. I mean, the issue of, I certainly am receiving emails at odd hours of the day and sometimes sending them myself as well. And I think there is an appreciation that people have got other commitments, whether they be elderly parents that they're having to look after, or children who they're having to school during the day. So I think, people's working hours have changed. And often that's not just down to what's happening in our firm, it's in response to what's going on with our clients as well. So their staff will be having similar issues. But I think it is important to maintain those channels of communication so that people know that, if things are getting on top of them, that they can that they can tell us so that we can do something about it. And that message has certainly gone out from our HR department. We want to look after our people, and we don't think it's not. And if someone is persistently sending emails at 3 a.m, then we're going to want to get to the bottom of why that's been necessary. But I think the onus is on individuals to spot that and to and to take appropriate action. Just sometimes it's tempting just to move on. You've got what you want. Let's just get on with the next thing. But sometimes you just have to stop and pause, particularly if you're managing teams. If it's your own team, and it's kind of your responsibility to do that.
Yeah, I mean, adding on to the points both Jenny and Dee have made, I think we're looking very much the both sides of the technology adoption scenario. So not only does the adoption of new technologies cause stress and people having to learn new tools and leaving their Zoom meetings open when they finish the meeting so everybody can hear them making dinner for their family is always entertaining. But those same tools, I think you can use them creatively to make sure people are okay, to have virtual team meetings. And I'm not sure virtual drinks always works, but the principle is great. I still haven't got around from my global director yet virtually, but I'm working on it. But I think we can use the tools that sometimes are the points of stress also to help us as well. And while we were talking, I guess the other thing that connected with me, because I'm saving so much travel time now, I've started picking up some of the books I haven't read that I've had on the side. And one of the books that I've started reading again is the Unicorn Project, which is the sequel to the Phoenix Project. Which, if some people are familiar with the Phoenix Project, it's a great book about an IT department and a very strange IT security professional going through an extremely stressful period. So if you want some empathy, if you want to see it through some other people's eyes, then that's a great book to read as well. So you can see it's not just us that are stressed out, other people have that too.
Fantastic, thank you, Ian. So not only do we have great cybersecurity information, we've also got a book review list. So if anyone would like to take a look at that and let us know what they think, please do. We've had some great questions submitted, and I know that Francis has been collating those for us while we've been talking. So Francis. So
we've got, I'm going to start with Alex. He was the first, Alex Bain. So he fired off a very two-part question, which I'm going to throw at you because it's going to, I think all of you will have a comment on this. So there's been an element of empathy towards IT teams now that users need to make use similar tech in their personal lives and experience the challenges themselves. Whilst embracing technology may have been addressed, how are the teams measuring the success from training and awareness? So that's one part. The second part, how are the panel managing data in their respective firms? Dee, do you want to start?
I think that that there is probably a better understanding. So if people are using things like Zoom in their private lives, that's certainly helped their adoption of supported platforms that we have, like Microsoft Teams, and because they've been getting to grips with Zoom, then it's helped them get to grips with Teams at the same time. So that's certainly benefited the firm. In terms of managing data, I don't think anything for us has fundamentally changed. We've been very disciplined in what we permit, and we enforce really strict technical controls, and we haven't relaxed that. We haven't had to relax it at all. And I mentioned that we had lots of small challenges throughout the lockdown period, and one of those relates to removable media. And what happens, occasionally clients will send data to us on removable media, and when you're in the office, it's not too much of an issue. We've got kiosk machines set aside that we can cleanse that data before bringing it onto our network. So we've had to find workarounds for that. Sometimes it's been the use of data rooms where if collaboration platforms, if the client is willing to use them. But even when they haven't been, we've been able to make arrangements. We've been able to get somebody in the office to do that work. We're fortunate in that we do have some IT people that live quite close to our office, so it's not been too onerous for them to pop in once a week. So we're fortunate that we've been able to do that. But in terms of the discipline around handling data, we've managed to maintain that, and I would struggle to justify justify, relaxing, those controls in any way, shape, or form.
I think what we did see, certainly around the data space, is there is still this need for many individuals to print information off. They want to see it and work on it in their homes. So for us, we kind of just ramped up some of the communication around making sure that data is handled as confidential and shredded. And if you don't have facilities, you need to keep it somewhere secure, which is fine until you end up with reams and reams of this data. So it's just reminding people to make sure that data is secure. We've also reminded people of how to dispose of that when they do eventually come back to the office.
Yeah, just to covering both of those, I think actually there's a straightforward answer to both of those, and there's a very complicated answer to both of those. So in terms of how do you handle your data, the answer is very carefully, but in a more technical sense, if you're rolling out Teams, we've started looking at doing more around Azure information protection and sensitivity labels. So, adding on additional layers for people that do use a lot of cloud storage. And then going back to how do you measure the effectiveness of training? That's almost the silver bullet. I'm not sure I've seen anybody really nail that, and that's not an invitation for more sales calls, please. But it's a very difficult activity to measure on a granular basis. So, you can do the phishing tests and get your click-through rates, but does that really give you anything more than a snapshot for a period of time? So to me, it's more about developing the culture and looking at the trends for awareness more than just maybe some of the single data points.
And I think that's right, isn't it? It's very difficult to just put numbers around this thing. We've had more reports of issues is not really in itself an indicator that everything is running successfully. So I think it's a combination of monitoring, is what you're actually training people to do really the way that they're operating, and you can only really do that by having good monitoring in place and seeing what that looks like, and then of course when you see that people aren't necessarily following those guidelines or policy statements, if you can put a control in around it, great. If you can't, it's targeted training for those individuals to try and help them find the right way.
Yeah, but it's also honest engagement. So, we speak to our users quite regularly, sometimes in the form of audits, but also in kind of training as well. So we recently did a question time format for training over Teams, where there were no PowerPoint slides, gosh, horror, but nothing like that. And that's sometimes it's sometimes in those types of forums that you get the very best feedback from your users. When and some of the most honest feedback, all the things that they're building up, a list of things over complaints, and it's quite good to get it all out into the open, because it's in those types of sessions that you sometimes find out what people are doing as a workaround, and then you have to know about these things before you can put in a control to address them.
So we've got another question. This is from someone who's remaining anonymous. Do you think that you have found a reluctance to return to attending work? Might this lead to fragmentation of service to clients?
That's a difficult one. So I think there are. This is one where I'm completely unsure about this, because I think there's a hardcore group of people that are desperate for things to get back to normal. But then I think there are others perhaps that have settled into a routine and thought, okay, well, I hadn't considered that I could be this productive working remotely. Maybe this is the way forward. So, I think there are, different camps here. So I think that, the opinion, at my firm, we consider that home working has actually been very successful. There's not been a noticeable drop in productivity, and that's been very encouraging. So it means that when these types of events happen, that we know that we can adapt successfully to them. But as for getting back to normal, that's a difficult one. I'm not sure how, if things will ever get back to exactly the way they were previously. But I certainly think that a lot of people are keen to get back into the office, separate work from family life. That's certainly the case for a lot of people. Probably those in more hectic households, perhaps. So yeah, I'm really not sure. I think there are. Yeah, I would struggle to put a number, a percentage on who is desperate to come back to work versus who is keen to stay at home. But I think either way, I think companies, by virtue of the fact that they have been working remotely for so long, have proved that actually they can continue to service their customers and clients successfully. So whether you're working remotely or in the office, both can work equally well.
Yeah, and I think just to echo that, I think a lot of firms will have already been working like that. There's multiple different teams coming together to service particular clients. It's really about continuing that dialogue with the clients, and I think that's already been touched on. It's important to stay close to the clients and make sure that we're supporting them in whatever capacity we can. We're seeing people who do, people who don't want to go back to work. Some people are worried about, taking up space on a train if they have to commute, when there are other individuals who maybe have a more critical need to have that space on the train. So I think everybody's just trying to be reasonable and thoughtful around that.
Ian, do you have anything to bring in on that one?
No, nothing major. I mean, I think I just reinforced some of the points Dee made. I think it's more around the changing working patterns that I think that we'll manage going forward. So I'm sure there'll be some HR-related issues with people being concerned about coming back to the office. But I think from a delivery of services perspective, it's much more being able to adapt to those working patterns. And I think in some cases, some firms have even gone to revised working patterns for a period of time. So I think it's just managing the availability of your resources. But I think we've got the tools to do that, and I think that's just an extension of the flexible working patterns we've seen before.
Brilliant, thank you. I just wanted to ask a quick question from another of our attendees, Carl Knowles, who said, what do you think about the working arrangements in the post-COVID era? Now, just to set the scene for this, I'm managing director of my law firm. Last week, I went to a cash and carry and went and It's great going to one of those places because you can socially distance easily because there's no one there usually anyway. So you just go around, industrial quantities of masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, those antiseptic wipes, threw it all in there, took it to the till, and they said how much it was. And I went, how much? I'm in Yorkshire. So of course I went, how much? And it is a lot more expensive than you think. But I mean, that's just me in a specialist firm, and I know that challenge is then multiplied 100-fold for many bigger organisations. So just very interested to hear what your thinking is with regards to the working arrangements we're going to be facing now in this post-COVID, post-lockdown era.
Obviously, we've issued hazmat suits to everybody, so we're going to be fine. But I really think there's going to be much more of a phased return to work for us. I think physically, we're talking to our facilities team about the layouts in the office as well. Obviously, if you've got your canteens and other services, they need to be addressed. But I think a lot of people will look at this as an opportunity and use that going forward to work in a very different way. So I know a number of firms are looking at how much office space they have going forward and how much they need. I know some of the big technology companies, certainly Facebook and Twitter have announced that they may not even expect their employees to go back to the office ever. So I don't know if there's any opportunity for real estate sales because they probably need them. But I think for me, it'll just be a much more gradual approach where we embrace and continue using the technologies that we've been given in the last couple of months.
I was just going to say that, and I don't think, law firms will also, they'll also react to what their clients are doing as well. So, if there is a reduced requirement for in-person meetings, then that's going to have an impact on our arrangements in our offices, meeting room space, that type of thing. So, we do keep hearing stories about other companies like Twitter. I think Barclays have said that they're going to encourage, home working on a permanent basis. We will be reacting to what our clients do.
So we have one more, thank you for that, Dee, and thank you for sharing your insights as well, Peter, and what you're doing. We've got one more question, another one from an anonymous individual. The nature of the challenge, do you see that you will be using a proctoring approach? Sorry, mouthful there. Proctoring approach.
Nobody knows how things are going to pan out yet. So, we are going to see, we're going to monitor, what our peers are doing as well, what our clients are doing. And, this is an area where it's very tempting to go down one route where perhaps you think you've got the answers, but I think you have to be extremely careful in let's say how you get people back into the office, how you relocate, and it's careful. We're certainly going to be very cautious, and we're going to take a very measured approach. Let's put it that way. I think it's just an area where we're just going to be taking a lot of care.
Yeah, I don't think, crystal balls are difficult to come by at the best of times. So I think it's kind of hard to make a judgment call what it really will look like when we're all back working after, because no one really knows when that is and what the constraints are going to be. So I think it's an evolving picture, and most firms and most individuals will just make assessments as they get more information.
And I was going to say very little to add to that. I think we're watching and waiting and listening, and I guess being open and listening to our teams, our staff, and what's happening elsewhere, as already been said.
Well, thank you, Jenny, and thank you all very much indeed for that session. I think we've had a really interesting discussion, covered a lot of different areas. I hope that you, our audience, have found this last hour really helpful, and that we'll see you again in the future on other Net Law Media webinars. Can I please give my thanks to Dee, Jenny and Ian, our panelists today, and thank you to Francis and the team at Net Law Media for for putting together this event. Thank you all very much.
No, thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's been great having you all. And I thank you very much to all the listeners as well. And we'll be sharing the results from this, you know, from the actual session on the poll as well with everyone who joined us today and also with you as well. So we look forward to you joining us at the next one for next week with our General Counsel. So take care and thank you all.